I watched the woman who stole my life fall apart on a stage, live streamed to millions. For a second, my heart ached for the life they had stolen. Then I remembered, the chemical compound that took her hair was a formula I designed myself. My name is Isabella Rossi. I'm 34 years old, and 3 months ago, I orchestrated the most spectacular downfall in Silicon Valley history from the silence of my own home. The live stream counter for the InnovateX conference ticked past 1 million viewers as she stepped onto the keynote stage. Sloan Kensington, venture capitalist, shark. The new queenmaker of the Bay Area, dressed in a stark white power suit that probably cost more than my first car. The massive 4 Kelvin screen behind her projected her face, flawless and confident, as she began her speech about the ruthless future of innovation. The audience, a sea of tech bros and aspiring founders, was captivated. They hung on her every word. But I wasn't listening. I was watching. I was counting. It started subtly, a slight itch at her temple, a barely perceptible shift in her posture. Then, under the heat of the stage lights, a single, fiery red strand of hair detached from the rest, drifting down onto the white lapel of her suit like a drop of blood on snow. Then another. The camera zoomed in, thinking it was capturing a moment of passion. Instead, it captured the beginning of a horror show. A collective gasp rippled through the auditorium as she reached up, confused, and her hand came away with a clump of her signature red hair. The flawless facade cracked, and pure, unfiltered panic filled her eyes. It was streamed live, in high definition, to the entire world. Everyone thought it was a sudden, tragic medical condition. A mystery. But it wasn't. It was chemistry. Because the custom-formulated, bioengineered hair serum she had been using for the past 2 weeks was mine. And I was the one who had changed the formula. Before I became the architect of that viral humiliation, I was the architect of Ethereum, the revolutionary fintech AI that was supposed to change the world. And I was Mrs. Julian Croft. From the outside, our life wasn't just perfect. It was an aspiration. We lived in a minimalist glass house perched in the Sausalito Hills with a panoramic view of the Golden Gate Bridge that bled into the Pacific. Our matching Teslas charged silently in the garage. We were the subjects of a glowing feature in Wired magazine just last year, titled The Alchemists, How Julian Croft and Isabella Rossi Are Turning Code into Gold. He was the visionary CEO, the charismatic frontman who could charm a billion-dollar valuation out of the most cynical investors. I was his secret weapon, the chief architect who actually built the machine. My code, elegant and brutally efficient, was the soul of Ethereum. He sold the dream. I built the reality. Publicly, we were a unit, a perfectly balanced partnership. In interviews, he'd always make a point to say, "I couldn't do any of this without my brilliant wife, Izzy," pulling me into the frame for a moment. I'd offer a tight, awkward smile before he'd reclaim the spotlight. At industry galas, his hand was a permanent fixture on the small of my back, a gesture everyone saw as supportive, but one I had begun to recognize as a brand, a claim of ownership. That brand was meticulously crafted, but inside our glass fortress, the silence was becoming deafening. Our 10-year anniversary was approaching, a milestone that felt less like a celebration and more like a corporate merger review. He was always on a call, pacing the redwood deck overlooking the bay, his voice a low murmur of buzzwords: synergy, scalability, leverage, disruption. Our dinners, on the rare occasions we had them together, had devolved into his monologues about board meetings and funding rounds. I was no longer his wife. I was an in-house technical consultant he happened to sleep next to. We were the perfect picture, but I was becoming the invisible ink holding it all together. It's a lonely feeling, being the foundation that no one ever sees. If you've ever felt like the silent partner in your own life, the one doing all the work while someone else takes the credit, just type the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story of unseen strength resonates. We hadn't truly connected in months, maybe years. The man I married, the brilliant, hungry partner who saw me as his equal, was gone. In his place was a CEO. And I was beginning to suspect that, for him, I was just another asset to be managed. The suspicion didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It seeped in like the persistent San Francisco fog, starting at the edges of my life and slowly obscuring everything I thought was clear. It began with his phone. For years, Julian's phone was just a tool, often left face up on our marble kitchen island, buzzing with notifications I never cared to read. But then, it became a part of him, an extension of his hand. It was always angled away from me, the screen brightness turned down low. He started taking calls on the deck, even when the wind was whipping in from the bay, his back turned to the glass walls of our home. "It's a sensitive investor call, Izzy," he'd say, his voice tight with an urgency that felt manufactured. "You know how it is, NDAs." I did know. I had written the security protocols for our company. I also knew that our house was a fortress of soundproofing and encryption. The only reason to stand in the freezing wind for a call was to ensure the person inside couldn't hear. Then came the late nights, piling up like unread emails. Our startup, Ethereum, had its offices in the heart of the financial district, a 20-minute drive across the Golden Gate Bridge without traffic. For years we'd made that drive together. But now, he was staying late for critical strategy sessions and emergency debugging that he insisted he had to handle alone. He'd come home after midnight, smelling not of stale office air, but of something else. Something clean and sharp. It was the scent of expensive whiskey from a specific bar at the St. Regis Hotel, the kind of place you take someone you want to impress, not where you huddle with your dev team over lines of code. His language changed, too. He started speaking to me in the same polished, evasive corporate jargon he used with the press. When I asked about his week-long fundraising roadshow in New York, I wanted to know the details, the real reactions. But all I got were sanitized summaries. "It was highly productive," he'd say, loosening his tie. "We're building significant momentum." When I pressed for specifics, what did Sequoia's team think of the new scalability projections, he'd wave a dismissive hand. "The optics are strong, Izzy. They see the vision." He wasn't sharing his life with me anymore. He was giving me a press release. He was managing a narrative, and I was just part of the audience. It was during this time that he first mentioned her name, Sloane Kensington. He introduced her into our conversations as a formidable obstacle. She was the star VC at Kensington Capital, a titan in the industry, and he framed her as the final boss we had to defeat to secure our Series B funding. "Sloane is absolutely ruthless," he'd say with a strange hint of admiration in his voice. "She's grilling us on every single metric, wants to tear the code apart." He made her sound like an adversary. He was creating a fiction where he and I were still a team, fighting a common enemy. Looking back, I see he wasn't just lying. He was building a firewall, a plausible explanation for the countless hours, the secret calls, the undeniable distance. He was giving his ghost a name and turning her into a villain so I'd never suspect she was his co-conspirator. The gaslighting was the worst part. He was so calm, so logical, that I started to believe his narrative over my own intuition. Maybe I was being paranoid. After all, building a billion-dollar company is stressful. Maybe this was just the price of success. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been the fixer in a relationship, the one always trying to solve the problems while the other person creates them? Type fixer, if that was you. Or type star if you were with someone who always had to be the center of the universe. I'm genuinely curious about the dynamic you've experienced. The fog of doubt finally cleared one night, replaced by a cold, terrifying certainty. He thought I was asleep. He was out on the deck, his voice a low whisper against the wind. I couldn't hear most of it, but one phrase cut through the night and struck me like a shard of ice. "Don't worry, Sloane," he murmured. "The asset transfer is almost complete. The board is aligned. Izzy won't suspect a thing until it's done. Asset transfer, Sloane. Izzy won't suspect a thing." It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a conspiracy. And I was the target. Asset transfer. The two words replayed in my mind on a cold, endless loop. It wasn't the language a husband uses. It was the language of a corporate raider, a hostile takeover artist. It was clinical, detached, and utterly devoid of emotion. The man I had spent the last decade with, the man whose dreams I had coded into reality, was talking about our life together as if it were a line item on a balance sheet. The warmth of my bed felt like a lie, the comfort of my home a carefully constructed stage. I didn't sleep that night. I lay still, listening to the steady, peaceful rhythm of his breathing, and felt a chasm open between us, a dark, silent space filled with secrets I was now determined to uncover. My first instinct wasn't to scream or to confront him. A confrontation would only be met with a storm of perfectly plausible denials, more corporate doublespeak designed to make me feel like the crazy, paranoid wife. He was a master of that. No, my instinct was the one that had made me one of the best architects in the industry. You don't argue with a bug, you trace it. You go into the system, follow the corrupted data back to its source, and you expose the flaw. The next morning he kissed my cheek, the gesture so automatic and empty it felt like a ghost's touch. "Big day," he said, adjusting the knot on his silk tie. "Final pitch, with Kensington Capital." "Wish me luck," I smiled back, a hollow, brittle thing. "Break a leg," I said. The moment his Tesla was a silent speck disappearing down the hill, I walked past the sleek, minimalist office we shared for press photos and descended into the basement. I went to my real office, a dark, cool room with the gentle hum of servers for a soundtrack. This was my sanctuary, the digital forge where I built Ethereum from a million lines of code. And it was where I would now find out how he was using it to dismantle my life. I bypassed the standard user interface and accessed the company's backend through an admin portal I had built myself, a digital backdoor that only I knew existed. My destination was the capitalization table, the sacred document of any startup. It's a ledger that shows who owns what. Every share, every option, every investor. It was the blueprint of our kingdom. I ran a query, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I expected to see my name next to my block of founders' shares, a hard-won 40% of the company, the equity I had taken in lieu of a salary for the first 3 years. The initial report looked normal, but my gut, the same intuition that tells me when a line of code feels wrong, screamed that something was hidden. I dug deeper, running a differential analysis against the last snapshot I had saved. And then I saw it. A new entry, logged at 2:17 a.m., 3 nights ago. It wasn't a standard Series B investment. It was a strategic convertible note, a complex financial instrument often used for fast, quiet injections of cash without an immediate public revaluation of the company. It was a ghost transaction. The investor was a single entity, Kensington Capital, Sloane's firm. With trembling hands, I opened the terms of the deal. They were predatory, vulturous. The note allowed Kensington Capital to purchase a massive number of preferred shares at a shockingly low, artificially suppressed valuation, a valuation that I, a co-founder and board member, had never seen, let alone approved. The effect of this maneuver was as brilliant as it was devastating. In a single secret transaction, millions of new shares had been created out of thin air and sold to Sloane's firm. My 40% ownership, my control, my stake in my own company, had been diluted to just under 15%. On paper, my life's work, a creation valued at over $20 million just months ago, had been stripped of its power. He hadn't just stolen money. He had staged a silent digital coup, effectively seizing control of my company and looting over $15 million of my future, all while I slept just one room away. The hum of the servers suddenly felt like a roar. My father, a grizzled old-school engineer from Naples, had warned me when Julian and I founded the company. "Isabella," he'd said, his hands stained with grease, "never give anyone the keys to the kingdom. Not your partner, not your lawyer, not even the man you marry." I'd laughed then, thinking he was just being a protective, old-fashioned dad. But sitting there, staring at the screen, I felt the cold weight of his words. Julian hadn't just broken my heart. He had used the very keys I gave him to lock me out of my own kingdom. This wasn't just business anymore. This was a betrayal so profound, it had to be personal. Staring at the dilution of my life's work on the screen, a strange numbness washed over me. The theft of $15 million was so audacious, so clinically executed, it felt unreal. It was a corporate crime written in the cold, impersonal language of contracts and shares. But betrayal, true betrayal, isn't found in legal documents, it's found in the heart. And while the numbers told me what he had done, they couldn't explain why. Why would Julian, the man who built this company with me, tear it down for her? Why would Sloane Kensington, a venture capitalist who could have any deal in the valley, orchestrate such a predatory, high-risk takeover? The logic of the deal felt incomplete. It was too risky, too messy. There had to be a motive beyond money, a personal leverage that made the whole conspiracy worthwhile. The corporate crime was the payload. I needed to find the human exploit that delivered it. My investigation pivoted. I left the cold sanctuary of my server room and began to look at our home not as a sanctuary, but as a crime scene. Every surface, every object, was now a potential piece of evidence. I started where he felt most powerful, his home office. The room was a monument to his ego, all polished chrome and dark leather, with framed magazine covers of his face lining the walls. I went through his desk with the precision of a forensic analyst. Papers, files, drawers, nothing. He was too smart to leave a paper trail. His car was next. I tore through the Tesla's minimalist interior, checking the glove compartment, under the seats, in the trunk. It was pristine, sterile. It told me nothing. My search led me to our walk-in closet, a space we once shared but that now felt like two separate territories. His side was a perfect, ordered row of designer suits and pressed shirts. I ran my hands through the pockets of each one, searching for a receipt, a matchbook, a business card, anything out of place. Still nothing. He was meticulous. A man who curated his life down to the last detail, erasing any trace of imperfection. Frustration began to build. He had constructed a perfect defense, a life so clean it felt like a lie. And then I saw it. Tucked away in the corner, almost hidden behind a shoe rack, was the leather duffel bag he'd taken on his fundraising trip to New York. He hadn't fully unpacked it. My heart began to pound, a low, heavy drum against my ribs. I knelt on the cool floor and unzipped it. The smell of stale airplane air and generic hotel soap hit me. I sifted through the contents. A few wrinkled shirts, a dop kit, and in the side pocket, a stack of receipts from his trip. I scanned them quickly. Dinner, Gramercy Tavern, table for two. Drinks, the Campbell, 2 persons. All claimed on his expense report as solo networking meals. It was damning, a clear pattern of financial dishonesty, but it was still circumstantial. It wasn't the smoking gun. I was about to zip the bag closed when my fingers brushed against the coarse, heavy-duty stitching of the inner lining. Something was caught there. I leaned in closer, my breath held tight in my chest. It was a single strand of hair. It wasn't mine. My hair is a dark, wavy brown, almost black. This was long, unnaturally straight, and a vibrant, chemical shade of coppery red. It was the color of a sunset, filtered through smog, a color designed to be noticed, to be a statement. It was Sloane Kensington's hair. I had seen it in countless photos in Forbes and TechCrunch. Her fiery red bob was as much a part of her personal brand as her ruthless reputation. In that moment, the $15 million heist meant nothing. The numbers on the screen were abstract, a violation of trust on a corporate level. This was human. This was intimate. This single strand of hair told me everything. It meant Sloane hadn't just been in a boardroom with my husband. She had been close enough, for long enough, for a piece of her to be left behind in the fabric of his life. The corporate betrayal and the personal betrayal snapped together like two pieces of a puzzle, forming a single, horrifying picture. The predatory deal wasn't just an investment for Sloane, it was the acquisition of my husband and my company in a single transaction. They weren't just business partners. They were a team, and their project was the complete demolition of my life. They say the devil is in the details, but sometimes, so is the truth. If you've ever had that gut feeling, that tiny nagging detail that told you something was deeply wrong, even when the world told you otherwise, just type "I knew it" in the comments. Let's acknowledge the power of our own intuition. I held the strand of hair up to the light. It was so small, so fragile, yet it was the most concrete thing in my world. It was the proof, the motive, the declaration of war. Holding that single strand of red hair, I finally understood the full scope of their conspiracy. The financial coup was the strategy, but the affair was the engine driving it. They were a team, a hostile force moving in sync to dismantle my world. The evidence from New York proved the affair was real, but my intuition screamed that this wasn't a long-distance betrayal. The arrogance of their corporate maneuvering, the sheer audacity of it all, felt too comfortable, too confident. It felt local. It felt like it was happening right under my roof. The question in my mind was no longer, did they have an affair? It was, is the affair happening here? My home, my sanctuary overlooking the bay, suddenly felt compromised, like a secure network with a hidden back door. I started to look for signs of a breach. I became a ghost in my own house, re-examining every room, every surface, not for clues of his life, but for traces of hers. I was searching for the ghost he had given a name to. But Sloane was as meticulous a conspirator as Julian. There were no smudged wine glasses, no forgotten earrings, no lingering scent of a foreign perfume. The house was as pristine and sterile as ever. It was a perfect crime scene, wiped clean of all evidence. Or so I thought. The final, undeniable proof wasn't in his territory, but in mine. It was in the one place that was unequivocally my own, the master bathroom. It was my private spa, a sanctuary of white marble, brushed chrome, and frosted glass. It was where I would wash away the stress of the day, where I felt safest. And on a sprawling vanity of her own, among her carefully curated collection of skincare products, sat her most prized personal item. It wasn't a shampoo you could buy at Sephora or Neiman Marcus. It was a custom-formulated, bioengineered hair serum from a boutique biotech lab in Palo Alto. It was my one true indulgence, costing nearly $800 for a small 3-ounce bottle. The lab had sequenced my hair's protein structure to create a formula designed specifically for me. It had a unique, subtle scent profile I had chosen myself: sandalwood, bergamot, and a hint of vetiver. Julian used to say it was the scent he associated with me, with home. It was my scent. He never touched it. He had his own simple grooming products and always complained that my serum was too fragrant, too complicated. That Tuesday morning, as I reached for the sleek dark glass bottle, my hand froze. It felt light, noticeably light. I had opened this new bottle less than a month ago. I used exactly one pea-sized drop per day. It should have been almost completely full. I shook it gently. The liquid sloshed around inside with an emptiness that made my stomach clench. A third of it, maybe more, was gone. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe I've been using more than I thought. Maybe I spilled some. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, letting my imagination run wild. The gaslighting had been so effective that my first instinct was still to blame myself. But the coder in me, the part that trusts data over emotion, took over. I needed to run a diagnostic. That afternoon, I took a fine-tipped permanent marker and drew a tiny, almost invisible line on the back of the bottle, perfectly level with the top of the serum. I placed it back on the vanity, in the exact same spot, oriented in the exact same direction. And then, I waited. It was the longest 3 days of my life. I went through the motions, working, eating, sleeping next to a man who was now a complete stranger. My mind was a constant loop of anxiety, every sound from the master bathroom making my heart leap into my throat. On the 4th day, Julian left for a lunch meeting with the board. The moment I heard his car leave, I walked into the bathroom, my hands trembling. I picked up the bottle and turned it around. The liquid line was now a full 1/4 of an inch below the mark I had drawn. A wave of nausea washed over me, so intense I had to grip the edge of the counter. It was weeks' worth of my own usage, gone in less than 72 hours. The conclusion was as inescapable as it was horrifying. Sloane Kensington hadn't just been in a hotel room with my husband. She had been in my house. She had walked into my private sanctuary. She had stood on my heated marble floors, looked at my things, and picked up my $800 custom-made serum, a product that was the very essence of my identity, and used it. This was worse than the money. This was worse than the hair in his travel bag. This was an invasion, a defilement. She wasn't just taking my company and my husband. She was trying on my life, using my things to see how they fit. It was an act of dominance so profound, so deeply insulting that it extinguished every last flicker of sorrow inside me and replaced it with a cold, clarifying rage. The victim was gone. In her place stood the architect of a war that had just been declared. I stood there in the white marble silence of my bathroom, holding the glass bottle in my hand. The weight of it felt insignificant, but what it represented was monumental. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief, the confusion, the gnawing self-doubt that had been my constant companions for weeks, they didn't just disappear. They were burned away, cauterized by a rage so pure and so cold, it felt like a state of grace. It was a system reboot. The old operating system, the one that ran on the legacy code of love, trust, and shared history, had suffered a fatal error, and in its place, a new one was loading. Sleek, efficient, and built for a singular purpose. For the first time in months, my mind was quiet. The chaotic noise of unanswered questions and painful suspicions was gone. I was no longer a wife discovering a betrayal. I was an architect analyzing a catastrophic system failure. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer a weakness. It was data. It was the fuel I would use to power the machine of what came next. I began to analyze my opponents, not as the man I had married and the woman he was sleeping with, but as a hostile entity with specific strengths and exploitable weaknesses. Julian Croft. Strength. His charisma was his greatest asset. He could sell a vision, control a narrative, and charm anyone into believing he was the next Steve Jobs. He was a master of public perception. Weakness. His ego. His entire sense of self was built on that public image. He needed to be admired, to be seen as the brilliant, untouchable visionary. The thought of being perceived as a failure, or worse, a fool, would be his personal hell. Sloane Kensington. Strength. Her reputation for being ruthless and untouchable. She built her brand on being the smartest, most powerful woman in every room, a predator in a world of prey. Her image was one of absolute control, from her investment portfolio down to her perfectly manicured brand. Weakness. The same as his, but amplified. Her perfection was her armor. A single, visible crack in that flawless facade wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be an existential threat to the brand she had so meticulously constructed. I realized then that a simple confrontation would be a victory for them. It would be a messy, private drama that Julian would effortlessly spin. I would be cast as the hysterical, scorned wife, unable to handle the pressures of his success. The world would see my pain as a pathetic footnote in his story of triumph. No, the punishment had to fit the crime. Their crime was a complex act of public theater, a performance of success and power built on a private foundation of theft and deceit. Therefore, their punishment had to be a public spectacle that exposed the truth in the most humiliating way possible. I wasn't just going to get a divorce. I wasn't just going to sue for my share of the company. I was going to dismantle their realities. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had attempted a complete erasure of my existence. They treated me as an obstacle to be managed, a legacy asset to be liquidated. They used my home, my private things, and my life's work as their personal playground, all while assuming I was too distracted, too weak, too irrelevant to notice. They thought I was a ghost in my own life. It was time to show them what a ghost could do. As a programmer, my entire career has been about creating order from chaos, of writing elegant solutions to complex problems. Their actions had introduced a corrupting virus into my life's code. My revenge would be my masterpiece, an exploit so perfectly designed it would use their own systems, their egos, their ambition, their obsession with public image to trigger their complete and utter collapse. Before I began, I allowed myself one last moment of grief. I walked into our shared office and picked up a framed photo from the early days, long before Ethereum was even a name. We were in our 20s, standing in the garage of our tiny Palo Alto rental, a messy whiteboard of equations behind us. We looked happy, exhausted, and hopelessly in love. I mourned that woman Isabella and the man Julian who stood beside her. I mourned the dream they had built together. Then I placed the frame face down on the desk. That man and woman were gone. I was not punishing them. I was avenging them. With a newfound clarity, I walked back downstairs to my server room. The time for diagnostics was over. It was time to start writing the code for my counterattack. Back in the cold, humming sanctuary of my server room, I began to map out my counteroffensive. The objective was clear, not just to win, but to achieve a victory so total, so devastating, it would permanently rewrite their narratives. Public humiliation was the goal, but the delivery mechanism had to be perfect. It had to be untraceable, elegant, and deeply symbolic. My mind, accustomed to running complex algorithms, cycled through the possibilities. I could leak the documents from the fraudulent funding round to the press. That would trigger a massive SEC investigation and certainly destroy Julian's career. But it would also entangle Ethereum, my company, in years of legal battles, poisoning the very thing I had built. It was a messy, scorched earth approach, not elegant enough. I could hire a private investigator to get definitive proof of the affair, photos, videos. But in the morally flexible landscape of Silicon Valley, an affair is hardly a career ender. It would be dismissed as a private matter, and I would be painted as the vengeful ex-wife. It lacked the necessary impact. I needed an exploit that targeted their core vulnerabilities, their egos and their meticulously crafted public images. I needed to attack the brand, not the business. My eyes drifted to my monitor, which still had an image of Sloane Kensington on the screen from a recent Vanity Fair profile. There she was, staring confidently into the camera, her fiery red bob so sharp and perfect it looked like it was CGI. Her hair, it was her signature, her armor. It was the physical manifestation of her brand, bold, powerful, and flawless. Julian's weakness was his all-consuming ego, but Sloane's was distilled into that perfect, fiery crown. And in that moment, the entire plan compiled in my mind with the beautiful, terrifying clarity of a perfect piece of code. The weapon wasn't the financial data. The weapon was the very thing she had violated my home to use. My serum. The bottle was the delivery system. The payload would be my own design. A dark, viciously brilliant idea took hold. What is the one thing that could irrevocably shatter a brand built on physical perfection? The methodical destruction of that perfection. My mind sifted through chemical compounds, searching for the right tool. And then it came to me. Depilatory cream. Hair remover. The concept was so simple, so accessible, it was almost poetic. It wasn't a bomb, it was a logic bomb, a command hidden in a trusted package, set to execute at an unknown time, with devastating results. That night, I became a ghost. At 2 a.m., I drove across the Bay Bridge to a 24-hour Walgreens in a forgotten part of Oakland, a place where no one would know my face. I wore a hoodie and a mask, a faceless shape in the harsh fluorescent light. I paid cash for the strongest, most industrial-strength hair removal cream they had, the kind that came with a warning label. Back in my basement, I didn't just dump it in. I am a scientist at heart. This was a chemistry problem, and it demanded precision. I put on a pair of nitrile gloves. The biggest challenge was the smell. The sharp, chemical odor of the cream was an instant giveaway. I spent an hour experimenting, using a dropper to add a precise combination of concentrated sandalwood and bergamot essential oils to the mixture, not just to mask the chemical smell, but to mimic the serum's original scent profile. I then used a tiny amount of a lab-grade thickening agent to match the viscosity perfectly. The final product was visually and olfactorily indistinguishable from the original, unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. With hands that were unnervingly steady, I used a small funnel to pour the corrupted formula back into the sleek, dark glass bottle. I polished it with a microfiber cloth until it was free of any fingerprints. Then I walked back upstairs to the white marble bathroom, the scene of the crime. As I placed that bottle back on the counter, I knew I had crossed an invisible event horizon. There was no going back. I had chosen a path of quiet, calculated warfare over loud, messy confrontation. So, I have to ask you, when faced with a deep betrayal, what is your first instinct? Are you a confronter, the type to face the storm head-on? Or are you a strategist, the type to retreat, plan, and choose your own battlefield? Let me know in the comments. There's no right answer, only your truth. The trap was now set. The logic bomb was armed and waiting. All I had to do now was wait for the ghost to return and activate it. The bottle of corrupted serum sat on my vanity, a silent, elegant IED. But a trap, no matter how clever, is useless if the target never steps on the trigger. And even if they do, a private detonation wasn't enough. My revenge couldn't be a quiet, personal discovery. It needed a stage. It needed an audience of millions. It needed to be a global event. I needed to build a theater for their humiliation. As a co-founder, I still had top-level administrative access to all of Ethereum's internal systems, a detail Julian, in his arrogance, had clearly overlooked. He saw me as the builder, the coder, not a corporate strategist. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I logged into our shared corporate calendar, not as his wife, but as a ghost in his machine, searching for their next big public move. It didn't take long to find it. In 3 weeks, on Tuesday, September 16th, Ethereum was the headline presenter for the final day of InnovateX, the largest and most prestigious tech conference in the world, held at San Francisco's Moscone Center. Julian was scheduled to deliver the closing keynote, a 45-minute victory lap that would be live-streamed to every major tech outlet on the planet. He was planning to announce the successful close of their Series B funding. His Series B funding. My fingers went cold as I scrolled down the speaker list for that day. The prime slot, the one directly preceding Julian's grand finale, belonged to Sloane Kensington. Her talk was titled, Alpha Investor, Dominating in a Disruptive Market. The nauseating irony was suffocating. They weren't just having an affair and staging a corporate coup. They were planning their coronation, positioning themselves back-to-back as the new king and queen of Silicon Valley on its biggest stage. This wasn't just a conference, it was their coming-out party. And I decided it would be their public execution. Now I had the stage, but I needed to control the timing. I had to ensure Sloane used the serum in the weeks leading up to the conference, and more importantly, I had to make sure she couldn't back out of her speaking slot once the damage was done. The first part was sickeningly simple. I had to give them the one thing they wanted more than anything: me, gone. I manufactured a family crisis. With a voice trembling with fake emotion, I called Julian, telling him my father in Naples had had a severe fall and that I needed to fly home immediately. I packed a suitcase, my hands moving with the steady calm of a surgeon. I let him see my tears. I let him play the part of the concerned, supportive husband, telling me to take as much time as you need, Izzy. Don't worry about anything here. I'll handle it all. The relief in his eyes was so profound it was almost comical. Before I left, I made one final modification to my home. I installed a tiny, motion-activated micro-camera, perfectly disguised as a USB charging block, in an outlet in my master bathroom. It was a gross violation of privacy, but they had surrendered any right to privacy the moment they conspired to steal my life. This was no longer a marriage, it was a counterintelligence operation. Then, I had to ensure Sloane couldn't escape the spotlight. Her first instinct, upon discovering her hair falling out, would be to retreat from the public eye. I couldn't let that happen. I created a new anonymous email account and reached out to Kara Zhang, the most influential and aggressive tech journalist at TechCrunch, a woman known for her ability to create industry-defining buzz. I fed her a leak from a disgruntled Ethereum employee. I told her that the back-to-back keynotes from Julian Croft and Sloane Kensington at InnovateX weren't a coincidence. It was the prelude to a rumored merger or acquisition of unprecedented scale, a move that would reshape the entire landscape of venture capital and fintech. I told her Sloane's speech was a must-see event that would lay the groundwork for this tectonic shift. As I predicted, Kara took the bait. Within 24 hours, the story was everywhere. The hype around their keynotes exploded. Now, if Sloane canceled, it wouldn't be seen as a personal issue. It would be seen as a sign of weakness, of a deal falling through, fueling a storm of negative speculation. She was trapped by the very ambition I was using as a weapon against her. Julian drove me to SFO, kissing me goodbye at the curb. "I love you," he said. The words felt like ash in my mouth. "I love you too," I lied. But I didn't get on a plane to Italy. I took a taxi to a nondescript extended-stay hotel in a part of the city he would never visit, my new command center. That evening I opened my laptop, connected to the secure feed from my bathroom camera, and I watched. I had baited the trap, I had built the stage, and I had sold the tickets. Now, I just had to wait for the actors to make their entrance. My hotel room became a command center, a purgatory of takeout containers and stale air. The only window to my old life was the glowing rectangle of my laptop, displaying a live feed of an empty, silent bathroom. For 3 days, that's all it was. A still life in marble and chrome, a ghost watching a ghost of a room. With every passing hour of inactivity, the cold certainty I had felt began to fray at the edges, replaced by the familiar, gnawing whisper of self-doubt. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the hair was a fluke. Maybe he's not stupid enough to bring her to our home. The waiting was a unique form of torture, a slow drip of silence that threatened to erode my resolve. Then, on the 4th night of my self-imposed exile, it happened. A small notification popped up in the corner of my screen, the text simple but electrifying. Motion detected, master bathroom. My heart seized in my chest, a violent, painful clench. I clicked open the feed. The screen filled with the bright, sterile light of my bathroom. And then, they walked into the frame. Julian first, laughing, followed by Sloane, a glass of wine in her hand. Seeing them there, together, in my most private space, was a physical blow. It was one thing to know, to have the data points of financial records and a single strand of hair. It was another thing entirely to see it. To see her lean against the marble countertop I had spent months choosing. To see the easy, intimate way Julian wrapped his arms around her waist, a casual gesture of possession he hadn't shown me in years. The sight was so profoundly violating that it vaporized every last trace of doubt. The cold, clean anger returned, and with it, my focus. They were getting ready to go out, likely to one of the galas he used to drag me to. Sloane stood before my mirror, touching up her lipstick, a predator admiring her own reflection. She ran a hand through her signature red hair, then scanned the products on my vanity, her expression one of bored entitlement. Her eyes landed on the sleek, dark bottle of my serum. "This looks chic," she said, her voice a faint echo through the laptop speakers. She picked it up. "What is it?" Julian, leaning in the doorway, just shrugged. "I don't know. It's Izzy's. Some crazy expensive custom thing." His dismissiveness was like a knife twist. Sloane unscrewed the cap and brought it to her nose. I held my breath. For a terrifying second, I thought she might detect the faint chemical undertone, that her instincts would scream that something was wrong. But she just smiled faintly. "Smells nice," she said. Then, she turned the bottle over and pumped a shockingly generous amount, at least 3 times what was necessary, of the iridescent, corrupted liquid into her palm. Time seemed to slow down. I watched, mesmerized, as she rubbed her hands together and began to work the serum methodically through her hair. She started at the roots, massaging it into her scalp with her fingertips, then worked it down, coating every last strand of that fiery red bob. She was thorough, meticulous. She was anointing herself with her own destruction. The trap was sprung, the logic bomb was activated, the countdown had begun. Watching her work that poison into her hair, strand by strand, I didn't feel glee. I felt a sense of profound, terrifying rightness. It was the feeling of a complex equation finally being solved. The feeling of a system, thrown into chaos by a virus, finally executing the code that would restore balance. I took a screenshot, then saved the entire video file to a secure encrypted cloud server. This was my insurance policy. This was the truth, in high definition. This is the part of the story where everything changes. If you are watching this right now at this exact moment, just do me a favor and type the current time where you are in the world. I want to mark this turning point with all of you, to see a waterfall of moments when the truth finally starts to fight back. Sloane fluffed her now tainted hair in the mirror one last time, oblivious. They left the room, and the lights went out, plunging the screen back into darkness. I closed the laptop. The waiting was over. The program was running. All I had to do now was watch the system crash. The day of the InnovateX conference arrived like a verdict. I didn't go to the Moscone Center. My battlefield was the quiet, anonymous hotel room that had been my home for 2 weeks. I had 3 monitors set up on the cheap particle board desk, a trinity of judgment. On the left, the official InnovateX high-definition live stream. In the center, a constantly refreshing feed of the conference hashtag on Twitter. On the right, a dozen tabs open to the major tech news sites and online tabloids. The air was still, thick with the quiet hum of my laptop and the grim weight of anticipation. It had been 13 days since Sloane Kensington had used the serum. 13 days of silence. The program was running in the background, and it was about to execute. The online buzz was exactly as I had engineered it. The story Karazong had published had created a firestorm of speculation. The hashtag number Ethereum Kensington was trending. Analysts were predicting a merger that would create a new titan of industry. The pressure on Julian and Sloane to deliver a history-making announcement was immense. They were no longer just speakers at a conference. They were the main event. An hour before her keynote, the live stream cut to a pre-show host interviewing attendees. And then I saw her. Sloane was giving a brief on-camera interview near the main hall. My heart leaped into my throat. I paused the feed and zoomed in. She was wearing a custom-tailored white suit, as expected. But on her head, she wore a wide-brimmed, cream-colored fedora, angled just so. It was a stylish hat, but it was completely wrong for the context in her brand. It was an accessory of concealment. A flicker of cold triumph went through me. It had worked. She was hiding the damage. At precisely 3 p.m., the announcer's voice boomed through my speakers, a voice full of manufactured hype. And now, please join me in welcoming a true titan of venture capital, the founder of Kensington Capital, the one and only Sloane Kensington. The live stream cut to the main stage as the crowd erupted in applause. She walked out from the wings, a forced, brittle smile plastered on her face. She was still wearing the hat. She looked like a powerful executive, but she moved like a cornered animal, her shoulders tight, her jaw clenched. She gripped the sides of the sleek, modern lectern as if it were a life raft. She began her speech, her voice a little too loud, a little too sharp. She spoke of paradigm shifts and aggressive growth strategies, the usual empty jargon of her world. But under the intense heat of the stage lights, a single bead of sweat traced a path down her temple. I saw her hand twitch. She reached up, a subconscious gesture to wipe the sweat away, but her fingers brushed the brim of the hat, knocking it slightly askew. A sliver of pale, inflamed scalp was visible for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The audience, both in the room and online, sensed something was wrong. The Twitter feed began to light up. "What's with the hat? Is she okay? She seems really off." Flustered, she tried to readjust the hat, but her nervous fingers only made it worse. It tilted precariously. In a moment of pure panic, she made a fatal calculation. She decided to own it. To take the hat off, as if it were a prop, a flourish. Perhaps she thought she could style it out, control the narrative. With a shaky hand, she lifted the fedora from her head. The collective gasp from the auditorium was so sharp it was audible even through the live stream's audio compression. Time seemed to freeze. The massive 4 Kelvin screen behind her, designed to project an image of power, instead projected a close-up of pure, unmitigated disaster. Her head wasn't just bald, it was a war zone. Angry, red patches of inflamed skin were interspersed with stubborn clumps of her fiery red hair, clinging to her scalp like the last soldiers of a defeated army. It was a horrifying, undeniable picture of chemical destruction. The chat on the live stream exploded into a gibbering, chaotic waterfall of emojis and all-caps exclamations. The Twitter feed became a blur of screenshots. Number Sloane's scalp was the #1 trending topic worldwide in under 60 seconds. On stage, Sloane's face, reflected back at her by the teleprompter, crumbled. The alpha investor, the shark, the queenmaker, she was gone. In her place was just a woman, horrified and humiliated on a global stage. She stammered, tried to find her place in the speech, but the words were gone. She let out a small, choked sound, abandoned the lectern, and fled the stage, a frantic retreat from the million-watt spotlight of her own making. From my hotel room, I watched it all unfold. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy. I simply watched the system crash, a cold, detached observer of the chaos I had coded into existence. The livestream director, in a panic, cut to a generic conference logo, but it was too late. The image was burned into the internet's memory forever. The coronation had become a public stoning. And next on the schedule, set to walk out onto that very same freshly poisoned stage, was my husband. The InnovateX livestream abruptly cut to a generic, pulsating logo, but the internet doesn't have a kill switch. The digital autopsy of Sloane Kensington's career began instantly. My center monitor, displaying the Twitter feed, was a waterfall of pure, unadulterated chaos. Screenshots of her horrified face became instant memes. GIFs of her fleeing the stage were already going viral. The hashtag number Sloane's scalp was now being cross-referenced with number Ethereum Kensington, creating a toxic fusion of corporate scandal and personal humiliation. The narrative I had carefully seeded about a mega deal was now curdling into a story of an epic, public meltdown. The fire was spreading, and my focus now shifted to the man standing directly in the path of the flames. My husband. Julian would have been in the green room, the plush, soundproofed VIP area backstage. He would have been watching Sloane's keynote on a private monitor, probably sipping a Voss water, getting into the zone for his own triumphant speech. He would have seen it all, just as I had, but from 20 feet away. I can picture him. The initial detached confusion, as she fumbled with the hat, the flicker of annoyance at her unprofessionalism, and then the reveal, the raw, patchy horror of her scalp under the glare of the spotlights. His first reaction wouldn't have been empathy. It would have been pure, unadulterated panic. His panic. Sloane's implosion wasn't just her problem, it was a contagion, and he was standing at ground zero. Her failure was a direct reflection on him, on the deal, on the entire narrative he had built. His keynote, his victory lap, was now set to take place on a stage that was not just empty, but radioactive. He would have grabbed his phone, frantically trying to call her, to text her, to find out what in God's name had just happened. But she would have been unreachable, engulfed in her own private hell. He would have been pacing that small room like a caged animal. His mind, the brilliant, strategic mind that had charmed millions from investors, sputtering, failing to compute. A medical emergency? An allergic reaction? It made no sense. And then, in the quiet chaos of his own mind, a connection would have been made. A cold, dreadful synapse firing in the dark. Sloane has been at the house, in our bathroom, using Izzy's things. He would remember my obsessive, almost scientific devotion to my custom products. He would specifically remember the serum, the one he always dismissed. And then he would remember my sudden, convenient family emergency. In that moment, he would know. He wouldn't know the how, not precisely, but he would know the who. This wasn't a random act of God. This was a targeted, precision strike. This was me. The realization would have hit him not with anger, but with a cold, paralyzing fear. The ghost in the machine, the quiet, manageable wife he thought he had successfully sidelined, had just launched a devastating counterattack, and he had just watched her opening salvo. A sharp rap on his green room door. The stage manager. Mr. Croft, 5 minutes. The voice would have sounded like a death sentence. He was trapped in a perfect paradox of his own making. If he canceled his speech, he would look like a coward, confirming his connection to Sloane's disaster and fueling speculation that their entire operation was a sham. Investors would bolt. The media would crucify him. If he walked out on that stage, he would face a global audience, seething with morbid curiosity. They wouldn't hear a word he said about Ethereum. They would just be staring at him, the man connected to the woman who had just inexplicably gone bald on live television. He would be a walking punchline. He had spent his entire life building a brand of being the man with all the answers, the visionary who was always 10 steps ahead. And now he was trapped, with no good moves left to make. He was a king standing in the rubble of his own coronation. Have you ever had to watch someone who hurt you finally face the consequences? That moment where the universe seems to balance the scales. It's a complicated feeling, isn't it? If you've ever felt that strange mix of relief and gravity, just type the word balance in the comments below. Let's be real about what justice actually feels like. The tweets from the journalists backstage started pouring in. Sources say Julian Croft is in a heated argument with conference organizers, rumors swirling that Croft may cancel his keynote. The master of the narrative had completely lost control of it. Another knock on his door, sharper this time. Mr. Croft, 60 seconds to stage. The live stream cut from the logo back to the empty, waiting stage. An announcer's voice, strained with false cheerfulness, came over the speakers. The whole world was watching. And waiting. For a moment, the world held its breath. The live stream showed the empty stage, a silent testament to the chaos that had just unfolded. Online, the speculation was reaching a fever pitch. Would he come out? Would he address the scandal? Then, after what felt like an eternity, the stage manager walked to the center of the stage, tapped the microphone, and mumbled a half-hearted apology about unforeseen technical difficulties. The InnovateX 2025 closing keynote was officially canceled. The conference ended not with a bang, but with the deafening silence of a man in full retreat. Julian didn't choose to fight, and he didn't choose to surrender. He simply ran. It was the most pathetic and most public admission of guilt he could have possibly made. I knew where he would run to. Home, the scene of the crime. It's what criminals do. I calmly packed the few belongings I had in my hotel command center, deleted the server logs, and walked out into the cool San Francisco night. I took a taxi back across the Golden Gate Bridge, watching the city lights glitter like shattered diamonds on the black water of the bay. On the drive up the winding road to our Sausalito house, I felt a profound sense of calm. I was not a ghost returning to a haunted house. I was the owner, returning to serve an eviction notice. I got there first. I unlocked the door, and stepped into the cavernous, silent space. The air was cold and still. I didn't turn on the main lights, opting instead for a few low, ambient lamps that cast long, dramatic shadows across the polished concrete floors. I walked to the wet bar, the one he was always so proud of, and poured a measure of his most expensive single malt scotch, a 25-year-old Macallan, into a heavy crystal glass. My glass. I sat down in the large leather armchair facing the door, the panoramic view of the city glittering behind me like a conquered kingdom. And I waited. An hour later, I heard the whisper-quiet sound of his Tesla pulling into the garage. The click of the door, his heavy, defeated footsteps on the stairs. He walked into the living room and froze, a silhouette framed by the hallway light. The charismatic, untouchable CEO was gone. In his place stood a haggard, broken man, his suit jacket rumpled, his tie loosened, his face pale with the sickly glow of utter ruin. I took a slow sip of the scotch. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly level, unnervingly calm. "You should have gone on stage, Julian," I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "Canceling was a bad look. The optics are terrible." Using his own corporate buzzwords against him was the first twist of the knife. It took him a moment to process it. "Izzy," he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What did you do? What in God's name did you do to her?" I almost laughed. "To her?" I set the glass down with a soft click. "I introduced her hair to a new chemical compound. It was a simple acid-base reaction. You, Julian, were the one who brought the catalyst into my laboratory. This isn't about her." I stood up and walked slowly towards him. "This isn't about hair serum at all, is it? Let's talk about something more interesting. Let's talk about convertible notes. Let's talk about my capitalization table. Let's talk about the $15 million you and your catalyst conspired to steal from me." The color drained completely from his face. The affair was a humiliation. The fraud was a federal crime. "You see?" I continued, circling him slowly, like a predator inspecting its prey. "You made a critical miscalculation. You thought you were just cheating on your wife. But you forgot you were also trying to defraud your chief architect. You tried to use the system I built to lock me out, not realizing I still had the master key." "Izzy, please," he stammered, his hands held up in a weak gesture of surrender. It wasn't like that. It just got out of control. I was going to tell you. I love you." "Love?" The word came out of my mouth with so much venom it felt like it could poison the air between us. "Do not use that word. That word is for partners. For equals. You don't love an asset you're in the process of liquidating. You lied to me. You stole from me. But your greatest crime was that you tried to erase me. You stood on stages and took credit for my code, my ideas, my work. You built your entire kingdom on the foundation of my genius, and then you tried to dynamite that foundation with me still inside it. What happened to Sloan today wasn't revenge. It was a bug report, Julian. A critical error notification to let you know that the system you tried to corrupt is, and always will be, under the complete control of its architect." He finally broke. A choked sob escaped his lips, and he sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. I looked down at him, not with pity, not with anger, but with the detached finality of a programmer hitting delete. "My lawyer will be in contact with yours in the morning," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "He has a full, encrypted copy of the Series B1 documentation and a high-definition video of your co-conspirator in our bathroom. I'd advise you not to fight this." I walked to the door, leaving him there, a fallen king in the ruins of our beautiful, empty glass house. I didn't look back. Walking away from my home, from the shattered remains of my marriage, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The personal confrontation was over, but the public war was just beginning. I knew Julian and Sloan. Their first move wouldn't be remorse, it would be damage control. They would already be on the phone with their high-priced PR firms in San Francisco and New York, spinning a new narrative. Sloan would be the victim of a sudden, tragic health crisis, or perhaps even corporate sabotage. Julian would be the stoic, supportive partner, bravely weathering the storm. In their version of the story, I, Isabella Rossi, would be a footnote at best, or a hysterical, unstable spouse at worst. The world wakes up to a vacuum of information after a scandal, and whoever fills that vacuum first wins. I knew I couldn't let them be the ones to tell the story. Silence was no longer an option. Hiding behind lawyers would cast me as a passive victim, another wealthy woman scorned. I had been a ghost in my own company and my own marriage for too long. I would not be a ghost in my own redemption story. I needed to be the source, the primary document, the one who defined the narrative. I opened my phone and found her number. Kara Zhang, the TechCrunch journalist whose reporting was so sharp it could draw blood. The woman whose ambition I had used to build the hype around the InnovateX keynotes. She was a tool in my initial plan. Now, she would become my megaphone. I called her directly. She answered on the second ring, her voice buzzing with the energy of a reporter sitting on the biggest story of the year, Kara Zhang. "Kara, this is Isabella Rossi," I said calmly. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Isabella. Wow, I've been trying to reach you all morning. My condolences for what must be a very difficult time." "I'm not calling for condolences," I said, my voice steady. "You've been chasing a story about a merger. That was a fiction I helped create. Now I'm going to give you the real story. The whole story. Meet me in 1 hour. The Blue Bottle Cafe in Hayes Valley. Come alone." We met in a quiet corner of the industrial chic coffee shop, far from the usual venture capital haunts. Kara was all business, her notepad and recorder on the table, her eyes sharp and skeptical. She was expecting a tearful, off-the-record confession. I gave her a cold, methodical deposition. This wasn't a therapy session. It was a data dump. I started not with the affair, but with the crime. I slid a folder across the table. This is Ethereum's capitalization table, before and after the Series B1 convertible note was executed. And this is a detailed breakdown of how my co-founder and Kensington Capital colluded to illegally dilute my founder's shares, effectively defrauding me of more than $15 million. Kara's professional mask slipped. Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents. She understood the numbers. She understood the gravity of the accusation. It was a bombshell. Only then did I give her the context. I told her about the late nights, the secret calls, the red hair in the travel bag. I told her about my custom hair serum, and how finding it used in my own bathroom was the final, intimate violation that confirmed the depth of their conspiracy. I didn't frame it as a story about revenge. I framed it as the catalyst for my investigation, the final data point that made me look into the company's financials in the first place. I gave her the motive, the why behind the corporate crime. When I finished, Kara was silent for a long moment, her pen still poised over her notepad. She had come for a scandal. I had given her a saga of corporate espionage, securities fraud, and profound psychological warfare. "This island," she started. "This is the biggest story I've ever heard." "And you will tell it correctly," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "This is not the story of a scorned wife who got revenge. This is the story of a female founder and chief architect who was systematically pushed out, lied to, and defrauded by a male CEO and a predatory VC who happened to be his mistress. The affair is the context. The crime is the headline. My name is Isabella Rossi, the creator of the Ethereum engine. That is how your story begins." As I walked out of that cafe into the bright California sun, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. For years, my voice had been a whisper, drowned out by Julian's charisma. My identity had been merged with his. By speaking my truth, on my own terms, I wasn't just exposing them. I was reclaiming myself. The world will try to write your story for you, to put you in a box, to label you. Have you ever had to fight to tell your own truth? If my story is speaking to you, if you've ever felt silenced, subscribe to this channel. This is a space for the architects of their own lives, and I promise you, you are not alone. The story was no longer my secret, toxic burden. It was now a weapon, aimed and fired. All I had to do was wait for the impact. I didn't have to wait long. Kara Zhang was not just a great writer. She was a predator who knew when to strike. Less than 24 hours after our meeting, her article dropped. It wasn't just published on TechCrunch. It was the lead story, the banner headline that would dominate the entire news cycle. The title was a masterpiece of controlled aggression, architect of a deception. Ethereum co-founder Isabella Rossi alleges massive fraud, conspiracy by CEO Julian Croft and VC Sloan Kensington. The effect was not like dropping a bomb on Silicon Valley. It was like detonating a neutron bomb. It left the building standing but vaporized the people inside. Kara had framed the story exactly as I had dictated. It was a masterclass in narrative control. The article led with the cold, hard evidence. Screenshots of the capitalization table, a detailed, expert analysis of the illegal convertible note, and quotes from securities lawyers calling it a brazen act of corporate fraud. The $15 million figure was in the first paragraph. She established me not as a wife, but as the creator, the architect, the victim of a high-stakes digital heist. Only after laying this irrefutable foundation of financial crime did she bring in the human element. The affair, the lies, the red hair, and yes, the serum, they were all there, but they were presented as the sordid, desperate context for the conspiracy. It painted a picture, not of a simple love triangle, but of two deeply amoral individuals who used a personal affair as cover for a massive corporate crime. I wasn't the vengeful ex-wife. I was the whistleblower. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. For Julian, the dream was over. Ethereum's board, a collection of old guard investors who cared more about liability than loyalty, called an emergency meeting. Faced with an impending SEC investigation and the public disembowelment of their CEO's character, they acted swiftly. By noon, a press release was issued. Julian Croft was suspended indefinitely as CEO, pending the results of a full and independent internal investigation. It was a corporate execution, performed in the sterile language of a press release. His name, once synonymous with visionary leadership, was now synonymous with fraud. For Sloan, the consequences were arguably worse. A venture capitalist's only real currency is their reputation. The article didn't just expose her as an adulterer, it exposed her as a reckless and unethical investor who used personal leverage to execute predatory deals. Her firm's limited partners, the pension funds and university endowments that had entrusted her with billions, started to panic. Kensington Capital, once a titan, became toxic overnight. A week later, a quiet announcement was made. Sloan Kensington was taking an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons. Her reign as the alpha investor was over. The InnovateX meltdown was no longer a bizarre mystery. It was the karmic punchline to a story of breathtaking greed. My divorce proceedings were less of a legal battle and more of a surrender. My lawyer laid out the evidence in a single, brutal meeting: the financial documents, the SEC investigation, and the high-definition video from my bathroom, held in reserve as a final, unanswerable threat. Julian's team didn't even bother to negotiate. The settlement was a complete capitulation. I regained my full, undiluted 40% equity in Ethereum. The fraudulent shares issued to Sloan were legally voided. I got the house, the art, and a significant portion of our liquid assets. It was a restoration, a complete reversal of his attempted theft. 2 weeks after that, I received a call from the chairman of Ethereum's board. With the company in freefall and their visionary CEO disgraced, they were desperate. They needed stability. They needed the one person on Earth who understood the company's soul, its code, better than anyone. They asked me to step in as interim CEO. The ghost in the machine was now being asked to run the entire factory. I saw them one last time, about a month later, not in person, but in a grainy paparazzi photo on a gossip website. The headline read, "Disgraced Duo. Ousted CEO Julian Croft and bald VC Sloan Kensington look glum in LA." They were walking out of a high-rise building, likely a lawyer's office. They looked small, haggard, and stripped of all their former power. They were no longer the king and queen of Silicon Valley. They were just two disgraced co-conspirators, bound together forever by the spectacular bonfire of their own ambition. They hadn't just lost their jobs, they had lost themselves. And me? I sat in the CEO's office, my office now overlooking the San Francisco Bay, the very view Julian had coveted. The war was over. I hadn't just won. I had taken everything back. Victory is a strange, quiet country. After the explosive climax and the swift, brutal fallout, I was left in the silence of the war's aftermath. I had won. I had taken back everything: my company, my fortune, my narrative. I was the interim CEO of Ethereum, sitting in the corner office that had once been his. But the first week I spent in that chair, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. The adrenaline that had fueled me for months was gone, and in its place was a vast, hollow quiet. The room was still his. His ridiculously expensive ergonomic chair, his collection of self-congratulatory industry awards on the shelves, his framed face on the cover of Forbes hanging on the wall. I was the victor, but I was living inside his ghost. My first act as CEO wasn't a business decision. It was an exorcism. I hired a team to come in over a weekend and strip the office bare. Everything went. The Italian leather sofa, the chrome desk, the awards, the photos. I had it all donated. When I came in on Monday morning, the room was a blank canvas. I replaced his monument to ego with a functional workspace, a massive standing desk, 3 sprawling whiteboards covered in system architecture diagrams, and a comfortable armchair for my old friend B, my newly appointed general counsel. I didn't just take his job, I erased him from the space, reclaiming it, line by line, just as I had reclaimed my code. The work of rebuilding Ethereum was my salvation. It gave my anger and my intellect a purpose. I discovered that Julian's charisma had been a mask for gross mismanagement. He was a storyteller, not an operator. I dove into the code, into the product roadmaps, into the company culture. I spent my days not in boardrooms, but with my engineers, the quiet geniuses who, like me, had been overlooked in the era of Julian Croft. We didn't just stabilize the company, we remade it. We rebuilt it on a foundation of transparency, merit, and a relentless focus on the product. It was no longer a cult of personality. It was a company of architects. The healing was slow, a process of debugging my own heart. The scars from Julian's betrayal didn't just vanish. There were nights I'd wake up, my heart pounding, from a dream of that glass house and the silence within it. There were days when the casual mention of his name would send a jolt of the old pain through me. But I didn't run from it. I faced it. I talked to B. I threw myself into my work. I learned that strength isn't the absence of scars, it's the wisdom you gain from them. I was more cautious now, more deliberate. I would never again hand over the keys to my kingdom to anyone. A year later, Kara Jang asked for a follow-up interview. The story, The Architect, 1 year later, was about Ethereum's incredible turnaround under my leadership. We met at the same cafe. This time, there was no tension, no secret agenda. It was a conversation between 2 women who respected each other. We talked about the future of AI, about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated industry, about the company's new philanthropic foundation I had started. As she was packing up her recorder, she gave me a thoughtful look. "You seem different, Izzy," she said. "Not just happier, you seem free." "I am," I said, and I was surprised by how true it felt. "Listen, this is completely off the record," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "I have a friend. He's a professor of applied ethics and technology at Stanford. He's not a CEO. He's not a visionary. He's just a brilliant, decent man who I think would be fascinated by your perspective on things." A year ago, I would have recoiled, shutting down the possibility immediately. The idea of trusting someone again felt impossible. But standing there, in the afternoon sun, I didn't feel that wall of ice around my heart. I just smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. "Maybe someday, Kara," I said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was an open door. It was the possibility of a new chapter, one that I would write myself, on my own terms. As I looked out from my office window that evening, at the endless grid of lights that made up the city, I finally understood. The revenge was never the point. It was a means to an end. It was the violent, necessary act of demolition required to clear the land. Now, the real work could begin, the work of building my own empire. Not of glass and code, but of resilience, purpose, and a quiet, unshakable peace. And so, we leave Isabella Rossi, not in the ruins of a life that was destroyed, but in the quiet, commanding center of an empire she reclaimed. Her story is a brutal one, a testament to the fact that the deepest betrayals often come from the people who know our own code better than anyone. What she did was an act of profound, calculated warfare. But it's important to remember that it wasn't just revenge. Revenge is about causing pain. Justice is about restoring balance. Isabella didn't just want to hurt them, she wanted to correct a system that had been corrupted. She wanted to take back what was rightfully hers, not just the money or the company, but her own narrative, her own identity as the architect of her life. Her story is a reminder that true power often doesn't look like a crown or a loud voice. Sometimes, it's the quiet, focused intelligence of the person who built the entire system. It's the ghost in the machine who knows where all the back doors are. It's the understanding that when someone tries to steal your world, the most effective response isn't to scream, but to calmly and methodically dismantle theirs. You don't have to be a tech CEO to understand this. We all have a kingdom to protect our own self-worth, our own truth, our own peace. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. It was a dark one, but I believe it's in these complex stories that we find the most important truths about our own strength. The world may never fully see the battles you fight in silence, but the people in this community do. If these are the stories that speak your truth, if you believe in the quiet power of the architect, then make sure you subscribe and join us, because your story matters, and we're here to listen. Until next time, stay strong, and remember who built the damn thing in the first place.